on this fabulous sculpture that I can't wait to talk about with you all. I want to first of all say how delighted and honored I am as well that Kevin, the artist behind this work, is joining us today. I think that it will be exciting to get to share our ideas and our questions with him. I'd like for us to imagine that we are walking into the gallery space where Kevin's sculpture is situated, and take notice first of what you see, what stands out to you when you see the sculpture that's in the middle of the photo up on the white pedestal. And then you can take note for yourself. I'm going to show a couple of other photos that zoom in a little bit more. So take note of what you see now and what stands out to you now, kind of at this distance. And then when we look closer, give yourself a couple of seconds to acclimate to this closer up view and see if you notice anything that you hadn't seen before in that earlier farther out shot. This work has a lot of details, and we'll get to see some even more up close detail shots of the work in a few minutes. But for now, let kind of the overall work sink in. Would anybody like to share something that they noticed closer up that maybe they hadn't noticed about the sculpture when you were standing a bit farther away? As we're looking at the sculpture, we might notice that there's some parts of the work that has more blue concentrated. In this photo up kind of on the right side, there's a few shapes, a few kind of oval looking shapes that are a light blue. And as we let our eyes acclimate, we might notice blue threaded in throughout the rest of the sculpture. So kind of in the center, both in terms of height and in terms of width, there's this shape here, this rectangular shape, and it has this metallic element to it. It looks like it has these fine details, and from this far out, we can't see super clearly, but in a few minutes, we'll get to see it closer. For me, when I first saw this work, it was almost easier for me to see it as a ship when I saw it from farther away, the photos that are farther away, than when I was up close, because up close, I just got so lost and mesmerized in the many, many objects that make up this piece. This might be a good time to share that this is a work made with found objects. It's a sculpture that Kevin made using a variety of other items that had other uses. And he would sometimes alter them in different ways, combining all of those found objects in order to create this sculpture in the shape and the form of a ship. Knowing now that this is a work that's a found object sculpture, in another word for sculptures like this sometimes is an assemblage sculpture or assemblage sculpture. Can you spot any other items that look recognizable? This photo is a little bit less distracting than the work in the gallery with all sorts of other cool colors and items. So I'll show you the work here, and then in a second, zoom in even closer to a couple of different spots where we might be able to distinguish some recognizable objects that Kevin used. What do we see in this sculpture that seems recognizable? What objects might we make out? I noticed right off the bat are hanging off of this horizontal rod near the top of this image. We see shiny little miniature bells. When I see this horse here, it kind of reminds me of the kind of horse you would see on a carousel or a merry-go-round, very decorated, very ornate kind of horse. Here's another close-up shot. Having zoomed in a little bit on different parts of this ship sculpture, are you noticing any objects or any items that seem to be repeated throughout these different sections of the ship? Just left of center in the photo, there are a couple of more miniature horses. Kevin, if you would feel up to it, I think that myself and probably the group, we'd love to hear a little bit about what you remember in terms of the materials, the objects that you used to make this sculpture, maybe where you found them, what it was like to manipulate them, and why you chose those objects, things like the horses, the bells that people saw.
Yeah, well, Firstly, it is a ship. It's a boat. And the objects in front, the objects in front are candle. It's actually a candle holder. The piece in the middle that looks like a radio is actually an old cocktail tray for holding cocktail glasses. And so that becomes the power for what I try to do is find one piece that becomes the battery or the power for the piece. And so that piece in the middle becomes the battery. Anything blue are waves from the sea. A lot of those objects are seashells and beads and anything else that I bought from the dollar store. That's where the horses come from. I really had to stare at this. I mean, it has in the back that those pointy objects in the back of the boat are actually the horns of a deer. And there's all kinds of stuff. I had to write down what was in this stuff because there's so much. In other words, whatever I collect, the broken wood, I live above one of the oldest wood shops in Newark. So I get all of these broken pieces of wood and I glue them together and I create these things. Port wine stain is actually means port wine stain is a birthmark, which I have, which actually legend says that port wine stains actually speak of reincarnation. So this boat is actually on a journey to another world. So anything blue is waves. Those things that come up, somebody said PCB pipe, they're actually bamboo, which I cut, and those are pipe organs. There are piano keys there too. So this boat is playing a song, as it travels to another world. The red strings that are coming up and down, they represent the ties that bind us. I can go on and on. I mean, this stuff is, my kids who are now 38 and 40 have learned to hide things from me because I'll walk around the house and pick it up and it will go into, the pieces. So anything blue are waves, anything red are the ties that bind us. And it's just all kind of stuff. The bells are making noises, the piano keys are playing. So the boat is actually singing.
That's fascinating. I think that, seeing some of these objects and hearing a little bit more about what you chose, it brings another dimension to this work where all of a sudden, instead of just imagining a ship out at sea, I'm imagining a ship out at sea with all of this music, with the sounds that the bells might make, the bells at the top, the jingle bells, the organ playing. It definitely adds another element, another kind of sensory element to this work that would be easy to miss if you just walked by it from a distance in the gallery, like we saw in that first photo. This is roughly 4 feet by 4 feet by 3 feet. And Kevin, you talked a little bit about journeys, kind of the journey from this life to the next, and how a ship can symbolize that sort of journey. I'm curious for everybody who's with us today, what comes to your mind when you see a big ship like this? What associations do you have with ships? Or maybe what stories do you think of when you see a big ship like this? Either stories that have been passed down through oral traditions or like movies, books. I'm curious as to what a ship like this, what image that brings to mind for you. So there are a couple of questions that I think, Kevin, you would be best able to answer here. One question, what is the destination in mind for this ship? And the other question, what do the materials on the sails mean? What symbolism do they carry?
Well, the destination is just to another place. So it basically dealt with reincarnation. So, but the destination is to another place, another time, another place. Ships have become a recurring theme with me. In my other life, I'm convinced I was a pirate. So, I mean, this was one of the first ships that I did, but I've done 30 more since then. The materials on the sail, again, are very much like the piece in the middle, the things that will give power to this ship. Everything on it is supposed to give it power and energy. And I like to think that it can take you to another place, another time. You can choose where you're going. For me, it was a return to who I was.
I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to what it means for you to work with objects that somebody else has owned before, somebody else has used before, and how that carries into creating something new, something that represents a journey with objects that, you know, in and of themselves represent different people's histories and different people's journeys.
Well, you know, I think people tend to overlook what a found objects mean, what a found object means, and why we use found objects. Because found objects hold a residual power from its previous owner. If I go outside and I find a broom, I know that a family used that broom and swept around their house. And when they discard that broom, it's still holding that energy. And as a retired police officer, we know that genetically it holds genetic material. And I like to think that it holds spiritual material also. So all of these objects, the ones that I find, they are supplying power to whatever piece I do. I had the pleasure, honor of spending 6 weeks in Venice with Lonnie Holly, Mr. Imagination, and Charlie Lucas. And I was able to pick their brains. And we've all come up to the same conclusion. You know, these objects hold power. And so when you find something that somebody else has touched or used, that's what that is the real power of the piece.
The way that you describe working with found objects and the power that those found objects have reminds me a little bit of what other artists who work with found objects who have said similar things. In particular, I'm thinking of Betty Starr, who is a Los Angeles-based assemblage artist who works with found objects, doesn't make ships, but creates other objects using old items, discarded items, and she describes it as feeling like she's being pulled towards an item because of the history that it has. And that element, I think, is part of why it's so important. It makes such a difference to really sit with this work and take it in, because it isn't until you sit with it and take it in for several minutes that you notice what the different objects are and start to think about what kind of histories those objects have. And then on top of that, what this work is creating by overlapping all of those histories with one another, overlapping all of those energies with one another.